It is November 22nd, 2021. It is also the anniversary of the assassination of JFK. And this is the Daily Rob. And make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff that helps us in the algorithm. And if you hate looking at us, listen to us on all major podcast platforms. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Rob Smith.
Hello, Stu. Happy Monday. I had a good time at the Tridel convention, and I got some phone numbers for you. About 50 or 60. They were clamoring for for me to give you their phone number. Stu, anniversary of JFK. You're a well-read dude. What do you think about the theory that the mob had him killed because JFK double-crossed them and that they won the election for him? They expected a lot more. And then his snot-nosed little brother, RFK, as Attorney General, really went after the mob. And the mob had deep ties to Cuba. So what do you think, Stu?
I had a friend in college, and that was her argument for who she believed assassinated JFK. So there is a lot of evidence there, whether you just want to call it ties or whatever, but it's a lot of 1 degree of separation from JFK to mob personalities.
No question about it. You know, his dad was no saint either. He certainly had mob ties as well. So anyway, Stu, over the weekend, maybe on Friday, we had the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. I was a little surprised because they waited so long. I thought, there might be some problems with the jury. My understanding is the jury instructions were very long and lengthy, laborious, and that might have been the reason why. But what's your take on it, Stu?
Well, I think the first thing we have to talk about is that I'm not even surprised they charged him in the first place. The government has been putting kids in cages for crossing state lines since the Obama administration.
He's driving across state lines.
Across the state line, across state lines.
Across state lines. Across state lines.
If you look at the Rittenhouse case, he crossed state lines. Drives up to events.
Across state lines.
Came across state lines.
Kyle Rittenhouse, who traveled across state lines.
From out of state, out of his own state.
Came across state borders. Whenever you have a situation where a 17-year-old is crossing state lines,
White teenager.
He crosses a state line, drives 30 minutes into Kenosha.
Remember, he came across the line.
He crossed state lines.
Cross state lines.
Across state lines.
He crossed state lines.
Kyle Rittenhouse, who crossed state lines.
Came across
state lines.
Cross state lines.
He went across state lines.
Cross state lines.
Cross state lines and
Cross state lines.
A 17-year-old kid from out of state.
He makes all
Cross state lines. Cross state lines. Cross state lines.
Across state lines.
Cross state lines. Went over state lines. Drove across state lines.
The media loves to talk about the fact that he crossed state lines.
Oh, yeah. And
he crossed state lines. And then meanwhile, you have a ton of people cross a state line, a border, a country line, and yet that is not seen with outrage.
I mean, it just shows you the power of the state and who they choose to prosecute. I see this in that occasionally I come across a crime in some of the work that I do, and I go to the prosecutor and say, look, I think I ought to tell you about this. They generally, if it's rich white people stealing from one another, they don't really care about it. But if they can make a political case, somebody stole from a little old lady and get their names in the newspaper, they might take the case. So there's a tremendous amount of discretion and a lot of politics involved in who the state decides to prosecute. Anyway, this whole idea of state lines, he lived only 20 miles away. He had relatives there in Kenosha. I mean, the guy, if you ask me, is a hero. If you look at Lexington and Concord, people rushed with their muskets to fight for the cause. That's in my book, that's what he's doing. He's helping to put down an insurrection and protect property and lives. And it's exactly what he was doing. And I just think it's criminal what the media and what the state of Wisconsin did to him. And it shows you how dangerous our society is when a guy goes to help, he's attacked by criminals. Every one of these folks, and even the guy in the white pants who stomped on his head that the prosecution withheld his name, they all had incredibly long, violent rap sheets, which shows you kind of who's involved in these mobs.
I will say the one thing that I changed on throughout the course of this trial was I went from thinking it was stupid to even be there to kind of reforming my thoughts on that. I only recently learned about Warren versus the District of Columbia this week. Are you familiar with that case?
I don't think I am, Stu. Tell me about it.
So Warren versus the District of Columbia is a District of Columbia Court of Appeals case that held that the police do not owe a specific duty to provide police services to specific citizens based on the public duty doctrine. And so I don't even feel comfortable reading this out loud because of just how brutal this played out. But it did kind of set the precedent that the police don't have to come and protect you. And that's a scary precedent to have set, because I think the understanding is that, well, the police will protect you if it comes to that, but not really the case.
Well, Stu, I hope to lobby the Youngkin administration on two things. One is when we have a situation like we had in Richmond, where the mayor tells the thugs and tells the police to just stand by and let the thugs and the terrorists destroy your city, that we have, as citizens, have the right to put the insurrection down. That's what the Virginia militia used to do years ago. And it's what I think a lot of us would have done, but for the fact that we would have been arrested. So I'd like to see the laws changed there. And I also would like to see the law changed where citizens have the right to use some sort of force, even deadly force, to protect their property. Because where does it stop? If you have a mob outside of your house and they insist on destroying your house, but you're not in danger necessarily of your life, then they can do whatever they want to do. And that's what they have done. So to me, there's got to be some sort of reform where you might give them an opportunity to step back or you're going to shoot them. But if they don't move back and they're advancing to destroy your property, you got the right to shoot them. Because it's, you've got to be able to stop this. Because it's an insurrection. It's a mob. It's a riot.
I would say my only critique is I think having that expanded power that the militia would have is the same reason I don't like these ideas of community policing, where it's just, I guess the idea is there, but I don't see how the idea becomes a reality. Like, am I able to sue someone? Like, let's say a community police organization believes intruder that they're trying to catch comes into my house. Are they able to just kick down my door because they think someone's in there? Or what if powers are being abused? Stuff like that. I get uncomfortable when it gets to how that would actually look like in reality. I think it's just right.
Well, you have the civil common law to protect you in circumstances like that. They're not. I think what you're saying is a group that's not the state. Do you have any civil liberties? And then you have groups that are quasi-state. What exactly? what is the legal definition of them, and how do they fall under constitutional rights like Fourth Amendment search and seizure.
Yeah.
So we got to be able to protect ourselves, and the government doesn't do it. There's big city mayors, all Democrats, just let people run wild and destroy your property and cause all this damage. Got to be a way for the citizens to fight back, and traditionally that was always the militia.
Yeah,
You have ancestors in the Virginia militia. That's exactly what they did.
I don't disagree with the historical precedent. I just don't know how that would look like.
Yeah, well, I'll work it out with the General Assembly.
Okay.
More than anything.
And then I guess the last thing I would say about the Rittenhouse trial is we are not his peers. We're not from Kenosha. We don't know what the reality of life in Kenosha was like. And my understanding from what I've seen some people discuss is that a lot of people on the ground in Kenosha were actually incredibly sympathetic to the fact that he got involved and was seemingly there for the right reasons, and then was maligned by the media as a whole.
Yeah, you're not going to hear that from the media, but it's just like here in Richmond is, the vast majority of everybody you talk to hates the riots and hates the rioters, but the media is never going to.
Because I was surprised that it was unanimous and that he didn't get a single charge, because leading up to that, we thought it was a hung jury.
Yeah. I will say this: when you look at the media's reaction to all this, I have one thing to say. Well, maybe more than one, Stu. But the premise is you cannot reason with the left. They are full of hatred. They do not care about the rule of law. All they care about are the ends that justify their hatred. That's all it is. Because any rational person looking at the facts that these criminals are chasing him, saying they're going to kill him, pointing a gun at him, smacking him overhead with a skateboard, all of this stuff, of course he has the right to shoot him to protect himself. But they go to great extremes to come up with these excuses. And it's all based in hate. I mean, and an example of this, which I think proves my point, is over the weekend, Jesse Jackson led a protest in Chicago. And guess what the protesters chanted, Stu?
I'm afraid to ask. What did they
It
chant?
rhymes. Only solution is a communist revolution.
Solution is communist revolution. The only solution is communist revolution. The only solution is communist revolution. That's right, we need communism. That's what we need. We need that.
Really? Okay.
That's what they were saying. And some people might think I'm some kind of John Birch nut because I see Marxism everywhere, but Marxism is the natural consequence of hate and jealousy. In other words, if you are filled with that kind of hate and jealousy, you are going to believe in an ideology that is much like Marxism. It has to go that way.
Because you have to have the binary of the oppressors and the oppressed.
Right. I'm a victim and I hate these people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's all about. It's what it's always about. Jesus is the answer, Stu.
And then I would just like to quote Michael Malice, who put out these two tweets. Amazing how so many.
You're having a bromance with Michael Malice.
I do admire him. Amazing how so many people so correctly are vocal about listening to, caring about, and being respectful to sexual assault survivors seem to care little about how it sounds to claim that Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have defended himself against Rosenbaum, the child rapist. Cathedral, which is like the big media, certain politicians, cathedral operatives are about one sentence away from freely proclaiming that if you defy their orders, you have waived your right to life. So,
well, not only that, and those are good points, but the whole idea of whether what he was doing there, that he was a white supremacist. That's like a trump card in poker for them. Doesn't matter if he was he was a black nationalist or a white supremacist, or if he was a child molester. Whatever Rittenhouse was or wasn't doesn't matter under the law. What matters is in the few seconds that he shot somebody, was he in reasonable fear of his life? That's all that matters. But they try to throw out all this stuff to discredit him, and it really has nothing to do with the legal ramifications of this. And in fact, it is a way to try to confuse people and the jury. In other news, Stu, there's a Virginia policeman down in Norfolk. His name is Bill Kelly. He got fired from his job over a year ago when he made a $25 anonymous donation to Kyle Rittenhouse and his defense. Got fired. It's just unbelievable. We don't have free speech. He made sure it reflected nothing on the department because nobody knew about it, but the left doxed everybody on that list. They found out he was a policeman and they got him fired. Where the police chief of Norfolk can go to Black Lives Matter, again, a Marxist terrorist group that has caused billions of dollars and kill people in his uniform, and that's fine. So we'll see whether he gets his job back. Speaking of hoodlums, Stu, and what we were talking about, the right to defend themselves, all over blue cities, there are these incredible looting crime waves. There was one they've been going on in San Francisco, but there was one that happened in the San Francisco suburbs where a group of 80 looters in ski masks in 25 cars pulls up in front of a Nordstrom's. I think it's called Woodland Heights or something. It's outside. It's a nice suburb of Oakland. 80 of them go in there. 80 people with masks go into the Nordstrom's and just cause all kinds of damage. They break everything and they steal a lot of stuff, and they all hop back in the car. And so, Stu, if you can't prosecute that, how are you going to stop it? Two, if you can't shoot the motherfuckers, how are you going to stop it? It's a conspiracy for felonies. Used to be, we still have the felony murder rule in Virginia. But anyway, in other words, if somebody was in fear of their life and you're conspiring with that, you could kill the other people or shoot them. But somehow there's got to be a way for people to protect their property. In the UK, as we've reported before, they're keeping real records. And they have conducted massive studies that vaccinated people 60 and younger are twice as likely to die as unvaccinated people. Is the newest study they came out. And that's not because of the fact that they're more vaccinated. It's based on the rate of death. And again, our media will just ignore that, and Fauci and the government will just ignore that and just want to jab, jab, jab. In other news along those lines, the rate of COVID numbers and death in Africa are amazingly low compared to Western Europe and the United States. So it seems the more they do to try to control it, the worse it gets. There's little other explanation. Only about 6% of Africa is vaccinated. They do hand out hydroxychloroquine in some places, but again, most of the people are unprotected and they have a much lower rate of COVID than the West does. Also, the CDC and Big Pharma admit, but they do it in a underhanded, stealthy way, and they'll show you a graph and there'll be a footnote here. They won't come right out and say it, but the numbers they publish do say it is more children die from the COVID vaccine than from the COVID virus. And this has been confirmed by our government. So what is our government doing? Wanting to jab every kid on the face of the planet. It's sick. You know, there are lots of reasons that we've discussed before as to why they want to do that, but it's sick when you know the evidence is there. They're killing children by making them take this vaccine. Anyway, Stu, one other little thing. So they had President Biden pardoned the turkeys this weekend in the White House. And you know, Stu, I always give the benefit of the doubt when the media jumps on Joe Biden for doing something, for misstatements or saying or doing something creepy. But it's creepy, Stu. When you watch him after he gives his pardon speech, he walks out in the crowd and he's looking just to put his nose up against almost everybody. And he really goes to a lot of trouble to sniff little girls. You know, I mean, it's just really, really creepy.
Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
He walks through the crowd and he sees a little girl. He gets way down and gets right in their face. And then, you know, he lunges over for the sniff. I mean, it's just, ugh.
So my story for today concerns the communications chief of staff, Emma Riley, who is leaving the White House, and she served as part of their communications team. We covered the other staff member who worked as Harris's communication director on Friday. And so she tweeted out on the 19th, "It was an honor and privilege to serve POTUS and the American people at the White House. I'm excited to be moving down Pennsylvania Ave and traveling around the country with Secretary Marty Walsh and U.S. Dole. Follow along on the road to build back better, Emma E. Riley." And so, you know, when I see a coincidence, it's tough not to want to focus on that. And so my conclusion is that I think the second communications person leaving really signals that they're not jumping ship. They were both asked to leave and both asked to resign. And they allowed them to do this with dignity because the press around the White House, around Joe, around Kamala is just that bad. And they want to bring in someone new who can maybe get the publicity up a little bit and find a way to sell them to the American public. And it kind of reminded me of when the principal at the Dalton school, he was fired essentially and faced a lot of backlash. And so he made it sound like he had accepted a new job when in reality he was fired. And so he said something along the lines of, "Exciting new possibilities have arisen and I won't be with the Dalton school anymore." And so the frame I have with this is where typically I expect people to say exactly what they mean. And I know when I'm dealing with the political class, I can't expect that. And that's why both of these communication directors were essentially like, "Oh, I'm off to do this now," because A, they have to keep selling themselves as viable people. But at the same time, the reality is, oh, they're just cleaning house of their staff because they can't get any good press.
Good point, Stu. I really like your emphasis on being one who just innately believes because you're an honest guy. But when dealing with these folks, you have to say, And I never really thought about it either until you just brought it up. They may have been forced out because the poll numbers are so low.
Well,
I don't know. But
I would say I would argue against our bias as well. It's if it looks like a sinking ship, we're gonna immediately think that's gonna be the case. But in reality, it might be a bit more nuanced than that.
Well, certainly if they had been pushed out, then if that narrative got out there, it would have created more press consternation. So better just to say, leave as though you're doing it voluntarily. We'll make sure you get a good job.
We have some words of wisdom this Monday morning.
Yes, Stu, I have some words of wisdom. They're very short and they go like this. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Stu, we have to remember why that is. And you know, the same night, within a day of when Lexington and Concord happened, April the 19th, Patrick Henry and the Hanover militia and some other boys marched on Williamsburg for much the same reason. If we don't have the right to be armed, then we are like sheep about to be slaughtered. Second Amendment is the most important amendment we have. Hoping that its utility was vindicated by the verdict in Wisconsin.
An armed society is a polite.
Oh, yes, indeed, Stu. Way to go.
Okay.
Order. Yes, indeed. You knock your mouth off to the guy who's holding a 9mm Glock.
Yeah.
It's yes, sir, and no, ma'am.
I believe Robert E. Howard had the quote that was, barbarians are more polite than civilized people because you never know when you could get an axe in the head. So, but yeah, right on.
All right, Stu.
Later.
I got a nickname for all my guns. A desert eagle that I call Big Pun. A two-shot that I call Tupac. And a dirty pistol that love the crew hop. My Tech 9 I'ma call T-Pain. My 3H nub I'ma call Lil Wayne. Machine gun named Missy so loud it go E-E-E-E-I.